In the last video, we talked about how CSA is often referred to as the PhD of farming and how production for a CSA program can be fairly complex. A solid crop plan is imperative to a successful CSA season, as we're often planting every week to maintain a full and diverse box. To fill every CSA box well, you will need plans for seed starting, transplanting, and direct seeding. You'll also need to work in some flexibility into the system so that you, as the farmer, can choose which items go into the box as the season progresses, and so that you have backup plans built in for crop loss, pests, and disease. In this video, we are going to break down the CSA box with a little bit more detail. We're going to show you the diversity of products that go into an average CSA share throughout the season and explain what makes up a good box. We're going to help you understand the importance of crop planning and filling your boxes each week and share our best tips. We'll also explain how shared risk and shared bounty fits or doesn't fit into this equation. And we'll finally ask you to evaluate whether or not crop planning is something you currently have the skills and systems in place to execute well. So, what constitutes a good box? In general, a good diversity of high quality and clean vegetables, not too much, not too few. Many farmers set a standard before the season starts of what they would ideally like to include in each box. For example, you could aim to have 4 to 5 different classes of crops represented in each box: a leafy green, an allium, a fresh-eating snack crop, and a root crop. You also want to make sure that you're hitting the value of the share paid by your member. You want to give them enough, but you also don't want to overwhelm them with too much produce or too much of a single item. When planning your shares, you want to look at your CSA boxes with many lenses. For example, the home cook lens. Did I put enough of each crop in the box that my member will be able to adequately cook with each item? The artist lens. Did I put only green items in the share or a diverse color scheme? The box packing lens. Will this all fit into the box? And is there enough to make it look full enough? The end goal is that you want to make sure the box looks great and is doable for you as a farmer to fulfill. You also want to make sure your members will be excited to and want to use every item.
So when we think about planning CSA, we really want to make sure that we are thinking about what we want to have in the boxes as a starting point for how we set up our spreadsheets and succession plantings. And so you want to have those goals set up for yourself and also make sure that there are things you can clearly communicate to people. And if you have a list like this one, to make sure that people know really what they're actually going to get in their boxes, and then making sure that the people that are signing up for your CSA are the right fit. And so if you have people that do not like salad in your area and that is not what they're looking for, my CSA would be a bad fit. If you're thinking about giving them whatever you have coming out of the garden, and it could be 4 to 20 items, then making sure that you're making that clear when you talk to people is really important. So for us, we say 7 to 10 vegetables weekly. That's actually probably a low estimate. We're closer to 10 to 12 most weeks. And that usually includes some items like small garlic or herbs that aren't like a full large item. For us, this includes salad greens. We include 1 to 2 items. So an example would be a half a pound each of baby lettuce and spinach. We'll sometimes use baby kales as well as lettuces, but that is in every single box throughout our season. So we never have a week without lettuce. Staple vegetables are another thing that we are clear are a focus of our box, and those obviously change over the season, but these are items that everyone knows what they are, knows usually how to cook them, and appreciates as they change with the seasons. We communicate to our members that we provide extra snacking vegetables. So those are things that most people in whatever region you're in eat raw. So where we are, that is snap peas, cherry tomatoes, carrots, sweet peppers. I know there's a lot of CSAs that will do a half pint of cherry tomatoes some weeks. For us, 1 to 2 pints is really what we aim for, because most people in our surveys have indicated that there isn't a limit on cherry tomatoes they can eat. Onion family vegetables, scallions, onions, shallots, garlic, leeks, etc., are things that our members love. And if you look up any recipe, the onion vegetables are required. So we want to make sure people can cook without necessarily going to the grocery store. And then unique vegetables. So this is something that I think is really important, especially for beginning farmers, is to keep the weird things under control. We're really conscious about not giving people anything they think is unusual, which is different than what I think is unusual, and making sure that there's nothing spicy or that has a strong flavor represented in more than one item. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that we try to make sure that when we tell people about our CSA, we say we do grow some fruit, but we don't grow a lot of fruit. And so we tell people to expect melons twice in the season and strawberries once in the season. We almost always have fruit in 5 boxes, but we want to make sure going in that people don't think that they're getting a fruit item every single week. So it should feel like an exciting extra to them, not like every other week that they're missing something. And so that's how we plan our farm. And we are not a very fruit-rich CSA. And so we make sure to tell people we do great with the veggies and fruit is a little bit extra.
Now we need to take a moment to discuss how shared risk and shared reward comes into the equation before we get into the meat of crop planning. Because shared risk and shared reward is perhaps the most important concept within the CSA model. And if you know anything about the topic, you may be wondering why you need a plan if the weather is going to dictate your seasonal harvest anyway. At its most basic level, shared risk and shared reward is the idea that eaters who join a CSA make a commitment to their farmers to share in the uncontrollable risks and rewards inherent in farming. The key here is uncontrollable. Certain weather events or pests or disease issues are part of the realities of farming. And by becoming a CSA member, individuals commit to quite literally weathering storms right alongside their farmers. However, a lack of planning is not a risk your CSA members should have to accept. Though shared risk and shared bounty is a key part of the CSA experience, there are many risks that can and should be mitigated by the farmer. A scarcity of vegetables due to lack of planning or organization is not part of the contract a CSA member agrees to. Not having carrots in a box because they weren't weeded or watered is considerably different than not having carrots in the box because 7 inches of rain fell in an hour. The reverse is also true. Shared bounty is the idea that if a given crop or a season is especially bountiful, members will be provided opportunities to share in or receive that bounty as well. But if you just planted too much kale, that doesn't mean you should give everyone 5 bunches of kale every week. It is your job as a CSA farmer to understand how much of a given item of produce your CSA members can actually handle and plan and plant accordingly. Understanding the upper limits of your members, communicating well through the bounty, and having other outlets for when your members can't or do not want to take any more of a particular crop are great strategies. A good crop plan should mediate at least some element of risk. You should plan to plant 10 or 20% more than what you need to fill the CSA shares, not including what else you might be growing for other markets. That way, if you have a crop loss or one variety or something isn't doing well, you can fill in with another crop that is ready or just substitute a different variety. The most important part of shared risk and shared reward is that you as a farmer clearly articulate to yourself and then to CSA members what risks and rewards they are likely to share. If you have less experience or other constraints, such as poor irrigation, communicate this as a risk. Member agreements at sign-up are a great way to draw attention to this and also educate new CSA members on how CSA is different from just getting veggies at the grocery store. So one of my favorite examples of shared risk that really was appropriately and well communicated in CSA is a farm in western Wisconsin that had been a long-standing CSA that lost almost their entire crop to hail. And what they did at that point was they reached out to some CSA members and then had those CSA members reach out to the rest of the members to explain what crops were lost and what damage they would see throughout the season. And I think what was important about that example is that those CSA members really understood what was beyond the farmer's control, in that case hail, but also understood the repercussions and then what types of crops they would begin to see once the farmers were able to replant. And I think that's a really different example than the one I gave before about losing carrots because you didn't weed them or you didn't water them or you didn't provide the basic care. And I think really being honest and communicating about the different types of loss and then also apologizing when things actually are your fault is an important part of being a CSA farmer. All right, so by now you likely understand the important role crop planning plays in having a successful CSA business. But how do you do it? At its most simplest form, crop planning contains 3 things to help guide you in your efforts to make sure that things get planted in a timely fashion so that you have full boxes all season. Crops and varieties, planting dates, and the amount of bed feet or the total number of beds for a given crop. This can get as involved as you want or need it to get. It can be a map with dates on it or an Excel document that you can organize by crop type. You can indicate if a crop is being seeded in the greenhouse, transplanted in the field, or direct seeded in the high tunnel. Make sure you are noting which crops need to be planted just once, like winter squash, or every other week, like salad greens. Some farmers even add their cover crop planting schedule and soil amendment plan to this document. The key is to get it written down in a way that you can easily follow it in the height of the growing season, and other farmers or employees can as well. Always trust your winter planning, but also allow yourself to adjust your plan mid-season if needed. Perhaps you have too many greens planted and you need to take a week off. Make sure to note that so you can adjust your plan for the following season. I wanted to mention that my crop planning process has really evolved throughout my farming career. This is my 15th year as a CSA farmer. And in the beginning, I didn't really have good baseline data for production or a very good understanding of how different crops grew on the farm that I was on. And so now, 15 years in, I really have a good baseline spreadsheet and good ideas of yields and those things that I can build my crop plan off of. And so I really suggest that people use some of the great resources that some of the seed companies have and other publications from Extension to get baseline ideas of yields that they can expect. But then once you've been farming, you can use the real life to reflect on what your possibilities are. So my planning process is really spreadsheet intensive. I also love to pore over seed catalogs when they come in the fall and then to order essential seeds at that time. So I usually have a good idea of certain crops that I'm going to be planting and what amounts even at the beginning of November. But then I really refine my crop plan for CSA, and I do that separate from my crop plan for wholesale because they are so different, and then I meld them into a single planting spreadsheet later. And so when I am putting together my CSA plan, I do build in a buffer. We talked about the 10 to 20% buffer, but I build in a different buffer for different crops. So crops that I already grow a much larger scale for wholesale, like carrots and greens, those do not have a buffer for CSA because I almost always have extra that I can draw off of. But for crops in the brassica family, like broccoli and turnips and radishes, those are places that I really make sure to have a bigger buffer. And in some cases, it's up to 30% because I'll be able to sell the excess, and I want to make sure that I have good, meaningful amounts for CSA. And the planning process for me is also iterative. So I usually go through the whole plan, I bring it together, and then I try to cut out beds. So I'm in a farm that's land constrained. And so I will go and make my ideal plan, and then I'll have to cut things to get down to the perfect size farm. And that's another thing that I've added into planning, which I didn't have before, which also keeps me under control. So it makes me make better decisions about what I'm growing and making sure that people that are in my CSA are getting what they want. So it's not just like me growing a bunch of eclectic French squash because they're interesting, because I don't necessarily have room for them.
Crop planning for me essentially started with deciding what vegetables I wanted in my shares every week of the growing season. I then used seed catalogs to map out days to maturity and when all of the items either needed to be direct seeded or sown in the greenhouse. This worked pretty well my first growing season, and each year since has just been adding to and tweaking. Now in year 10, lots of things are second nature as to their timing, and I'll throw in an extra seeding of arugula, lettuce, or radishes, things that are fast, anytime I anticipate I might have a hole. Don't get me wrong, my crop plan is close to a 30-page Excel spreadsheet at this point. It dictates the daily greenhouse happenings on my farm. Crop planning is an essential part of running a successful CSA farm because no customer wants to receive the same vegetables in their box week after week. One of my goals is to have at least one new item in each week's CSA share throughout the entire growing season.
In this video, we explained the importance of a solid yet flexible crop plan to guide your seeding and transplanting throughout the growing season. We went through the variety of crops required for a good full CSA box while taking a look at a few examples. We also heard different methods of crop planning. Before moving into the next video, take some time to think about how you might develop a crop plan if you don't have one yet, or how you can better hone your current crop plan to fit the CSA model.